I might just make a start and just slowly say a few words as people start to join us this afternoon. Um, and I'll begin those words by acknowledging that I'm on Irriganji land here in North Queensland, the Nommabada campus in Cairns. So JCU's most, well, it's not its most northern campus, but it's okay for me, the central one. Uh, and it does look like we're joining this virtual meeting from a lot of different places on the continent, and perhaps even further than that. We have people join us from across the world at these seminars, and I want to say to our presenters today that this is our last seminar for the year, and I'm really pleased that you're all able to join us and to talk about this really important project. The Roderick Centre for Australian Literature and Creative Writing was established about 2.5 years ago, and established with the very generous contribution from Professor Colin Roderick and his wife Margaret Roderick. It supported a lot of our activities. It supports an ongoing contribution to the study of Australian literature and creative writing that Colin Roderick began when he showed up in Townsville in 1960. Oh, I've now forgotten the year. In the 1960s. So the foundation chair of English literature here at James Cook University established the Foundation for Australian Literary Studies, the annual award that is now known as the Colin and Margaret Roderick Literary Award. So the Foundation of Australian Literary Studies is a companion body to the Roderick Centre for Australian Literature and Creative Writing. And so it's a real honour to be able to do this sort of work in raising awareness about Australian literature in all of its forms. And when I say all of its forms, the publishing of that then is a really important component of that. And our presenters this afternoon have been roaming far and wide in regional Australia. I said to Kim when she first came on, the last time I saw Kim Wilkins was in Townsville Airport on one of her forays up to the north. I'm really looking forward to this presentation. It's one that's going to be important for today and also for tomorrow. It's an esteemed collection of human beings who we're listening to this afternoon. Alexandra Dane is a senior lecturer in media and communications and publishing and communications at the University of Melbourne. Beth Driscoll is professor in publishing and communications and deputy dean academic in the Faculty of Arts at that same university. Kim Wilkins is a recognised expert on storytelling, popular literature, and the publishing industry at the University of Queensland, and also doing significant administration work now for the university and all of us. And Sandra Phillips holds a professorship in publishing and communications in the School of Culture and Communication at the University of Melbourne, specialising in Indigenous writing, editing, and publishing. Just saying all of those words demonstrates the contributions that this group of people have made and are making to Australian literary studies, and particularly publishing studies. Welcome, Alexandra, Kim, Beth, and Sandra. Please. I'm not sure who's going to start, so I'll just let you sort that one out, and we'll really look forward to the discussion this afternoon.
I'm going to start, actually. Thank you, Roger, for having us, and to the Roderick Centre. It was just a really wonderful invitation to receive, and we have so many aligned values around Australian literature and what that means. So it's really exciting to be here. As is tradition, I'm going to announce that I'm going to share my screen. So bear with me for 1 second. We have some slides. Okay. Is that good for everyone?
Yep.
Okay. So today we're going to be presenting community publishing in regional Australia, writing, editing, marketing and distribution. I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, on whose unceded land I live and work, as do many of our team members here today. I'd also like to extend that acknowledgement to the Arrante people of Mparntwe, Alice Springs, the Bindal and the Juru people in the Burdekin region, the Willyama people of the Bukanji Nation, and the Koa people in central Western Queensland. Those are the lands that we were conducting our research on. So I want to pay my respects to the First Nations people of those regions. So this presentation is part of our ARC linkage project called Community Publishing in Regional Australia. Our aim with this project is to understand the independent writing and publishing activity that's occurring in regional Australia. We're keen to understand not only the nature of this activity, but also the motivations for this work and the relationship between independently published books and the communities that they're a part of. To briefly provide a bit of theoretical context for this research, the work is informed and we're guided by Indigenous epistemologies, drawing on the work of Commonbury scholar Mary Graham. And Graham says, the two most important kinds of relationship are, firstly, those between the land and people, and secondly, those amongst the people themselves, the second always being contingent on the first. Because land is sacred and must be looked after, the relation between people and land becomes the template for society and social relations. Therefore, all meaning comes from the land. Guided by Graham, we start our inquiry with place, or the land, and use this to shape our scholarly understandings of publishing practice. Disciplinary accounts of book publishing, such as Dan Sinekin's Big Fiction, do focus on place, and in the case of this book, it's about the place that they're focusing on is New York City. But this focus is done in terms of the economic activity and opportunities that place, rather than the land, the community, or the lives of the relevance can afford. Pascal Casanova's articulation of the World Republic of Letters also reckons with place, but as a marker of prestige and power and the relationships between place rather than the relationality between people and place. Other scholars such as Danielle Fuller, Lynn Pierce and Clayton Childress have explored the relationship between particular regions and their publishing activity. What makes our research distinctive is that we start with places in Australia and seek to understand publishing activity as a relational dynamic involving place and community. The writers and books that we're interested in cannot be separated from place and community, and we're keen to understand those ties. As such, our research methods are keenly attuned to narrative and relationships. We have partnered with 4 local councils in regional Australia who help us to understand the writing and publishing activity in their communities. Today's presentation draws upon our fieldwork in 4 key sites: Mparntwe, Alice Springs, Ayr, Broken Hill, and Winton, and covers the 4 key points of the publishing process: writing, editing, marketing, and distribution. Kim.
Hi, everybody. I get to go first because there are no books without writing. So it's sometimes hard to tell whether anybody still believes in the writer as a solitary genius, wandering the moors in his puffy shirt, inspired by daffodils. I think the fact that I can poke fun at it suggests that those old ideas about creativity are shuffling slowly out of the popular imagination, or maybe mincing slowly out of the popular imagination. Yet even in this dispersed digital age, we still see emphasis on individual authors as creators and brands, speaking at literary festivals, and occasionally heading to solitary retreats where they will write like the wind and Instagram all about it. And that's reasonable. Look, that's reasonable. A writer does most of the work and deserves their name on the cover, but they don't do all of the work, and they probably never have. And so much of my research is sought to understand the invisible work supporting creative writing, the cooperative networks, as Howard Becker calls them, or the genre worlds, as Beth and I have published elsewhere. the crit groups, the beta readers, the friends who babysat, the mothers who read undercooked drafts, the industry professionals, the whole complex entangled infrastructure that brings stories into the world. Our project in regional Australia has afforded me fresh perspective on this infrastructure through the lens of place. My focus this evening is on how in small towns, writing shapes community and how community shapes writing. So first, new slide, Alex, how writing shapes community. In our fieldwork, we spoke to many people writing their life stories. These stories are often conceived as a contribution to community, to remember or pass on subjective knowledge that would otherwise be lost. For example, Winton writer Rainey Gillies describes her memoir as, quote, more or less a history of Winton. So intertwined is her story with the town of Winton. Next slide, please. Life writing can serve as what this lovely gentleman, Jeff Close, calls folk history. And he suggests how important this is in an age of globalization. He says, you can't expect overseas people to also supply our history because that is ours and it's up to us to nurture that, record it and pass it on. I'll talk a little bit more about Jeff later. Life writing also builds community across generations. Sonia Shoya Bradley, an Aboriginal writer who has published a poetry memoir, told us how important it was to quote, share with others my family story so they could understand the trauma that comes with having your grandmother caught in a net when she was 2 years old and the ramifications of that down generations. So that's where life writing is seen as developing community. Beyond that, there's also sort of formal local histories, and they're often presented as tools for knowledge preservation. Next slide, please. Burdekin regional dynamo Mickey McKellar told us that the history of migrants in the Burdekin region really, quote, needs to be told. You get snippets here and there, but you don't get an overarching picture, end quote. And that's quite widely felt in the Burdekin region by a lot of people. Christine Adams from Broken Hill, who actually does write formal history books about the region and has written multiple of them, sees preserving history as about community cohesion. The early migrants who built the city, she says, all fought the same cause. They stood side by side with the other residents of Broken Hill. Another way that writing serves community is by preserving language, Indigenous languages. Next slide, please. Olivia Nigro of Running Water Community Press, an Indigenous author-owned cooperative publisher from Alice Springs, Mparntwe, told us, quote, a major priority for members of the press is language publishing, end quote, for, opening quotes again, preserving and documenting and sharing and fortifying language in the community, end quote. And this preservation is linked to place because, as Aboriginal poet Teresa Panenka Alice says, quote, language rises out of the land. And so in Nigro's view, the press publishes in service of relationship with country. So in those examples that I've just given you, writing in regional communities is seen as a way to benefit those communities, to build those communities, and to create shared understandings both now and into the future. But on the other foot, next slide, please. How do communities benefit writing? How do communities actually shape writing? Well, at all of our fieldwork sites, we encountered several individuals that we came to think of as regional dynamos. They organize writers' groups, events, festivals. They encourage people to write. They help them publish. Conceptually, these people are a species of what Bourdieu originally called cultural intermediaries, though he was referring to taste shapers, such as reviewers. But that concept of the cultural intermediary has been broadened by current theorists like Jones, Perry, and Long to include people who facilitate both the consumption and the production of culture in communities. And examples include the aforementioned Mickey McKellar from the Burdekin Readers and Writers Association. And in that photograph, Mickey is in the front row with the vibrant red hair. And her energy powered the Ignite Your Mind literary festival that became legendary, at least among writer friends that I know, for being the best fun and having the best catering on the regional writing festival circuit. Next slide, please, Alex. Mickey seems to recognize the uniqueness of her contribution, and she worries about what will happen when she steps aside. She told us, quote, "Our biggest problem is that we can get people interested on the days the events are staged, but you cannot get people interested in joining committees and being part of that organizational team," end quote. And I'm just back from the Burdekin. I was there on the weekend, and it does actually look as though Mickey's fears will be realised, because the association looks like it really is in trouble now that she's stepped aside as their leader. Happy to talk about that in question time. Another example of a regional dynamo would be Winton's Jeff Close, who I showed you a picture of earlier, who organises the Outback Writers Festival, and who owns a small press called Spur and 8 Press. And he publishes local writers through this. And his business model is that he will chat to people in pubs, listen to their stories, and if they're interesting, he'll just pester them until they write it down, and then he'll publish it. And now he's published more than 50 books. And so people like Jeff and Mickey and these other regional dynamos bring creative energy to their communities to make things happen. And from my own experience as a writer, beyond our field sites, I know that these aren't isolated cases. Whenever I've attended a regional writing event of some kind, I've met a regional dynamo, and perhaps in your own experience, you can think of some of these people too. So beyond these individuals, these community-minded individuals that are shaping writing and publishing outcomes, there are also writing groups, lots and lots of writing groups. So the Burdekin Creative Writers Group swaps stories and offers critique monthly, and they produce anthologies of work as well. Next slide, please. Megan Hippler, one of the members, says, quote, "Each month we bring in the story, we read them out loud as a group, hand out copies, and then the next month they give them back with comments. So you'll be getting back 8-ish copies of your story with 8 different comments on them, some ranging from good, I love this, to some being more in-depth," end quote. And isn't it lovely to think of regional writers getting together to read each other's work? But I want to note something. This is not the Burdekin Readers and Writers Association I cited earlier. This is a different writers group in Ayr who, as member George Venables told us, the Burdekin Readers and Writers Association, quote, "didn't want to have anything to do with, they weren't going to support us, you're on your own, so we found different places to meet," end quote. And so you know that you've truly leveled up as a creative hub when you get a creative rift like that, I think. So that's marvelous. So while meeting in person to talk about writing offers creative nourishment to some writers, we do occasionally meet younger writers interested often in genre fiction, most often fantasy and romance, for whom local groups are perhaps not as useful, and online writing support provides a different kind of community that's not place-based. So Megan Hippler, who I mentioned earlier, engaged her local group in person and online, but she also took part in writing sprints in an international NaNoWriMo online group. So that's National Novel Writing Month group, with people as close by to her as Townsville and as far away from her as Oklahoma. Next slide, please, Alex. Grace Elliott from Winton is a writer from Winton, is part of an online community called Books and Bitches Down Under. And she says, quote, "They've been so welcoming. There's no gatekeeping. It's just really nice to see that information be shared so freely," end quote. And she, like Megan, did writing sprints with a different international NaNoWriMo writers group, who she is still engaging with, or she was when we spoke to her. And she tells us, quote, "It's since evolved into doing exercises together, goal setting, pushing each other, craft learning. Let me help you with your project," end quote. Alice Springs' Mparntwe romance writer Kathleen Ryder appears to engage with other writers exclusively online through Facebook groups such as the Romance Cafe, which is a collective of Australia and New Zealand self-published romance authors who band together to make fundraising anthologies. Facebook is also where she connects with editors, cover designers, and the rest of the whole indie romance writing ecosystem. So that's just a quick overview of the ways writing and community do, and sometimes don't, intersect in regional places. So while individuals are the people writing the words on the page, and if successful, getting their names on the covers of books, they also write for, in, and with community. Evidence suggests that this is not unusual for all writers, but for regional writers, some of the reasons to engage or not engage are sharper or even more urgent. Alex, shall I pass back to you, or shall I pass to Sandra?
Right on to Sandra.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Wonderful. And Alex, if you could also, yes, wonderful. So I have 4 slides to share with people today, and I will contextualize as my colleagues before me have as well. So I was interested in writers' approaches to editing, indeed, because we were exploring the journeys towards publication and the choices that writers based in regional areas are making around those choices. So I agree entirely with Kim that without the writer, we have no work, we have no book, we have no publishing. Equally, the publishing process requires a sequence of important decisions, many of which require planning, a level of knowledge, an understanding of budget allocation or not, and an understanding of the way in which those decisions influence the shape and output of the writing as it reaches its readers. So I focused here on attitudes as I've discerned them from our interview transcripts towards editing, knowledge, the apparent knowledge about editing that our interviewed writers have indicated, and just notions of the different types of editing, proofing, copy editing, and structural editing. So I'll start first with attitude, and I went straight to the data or the insights, and I'll share some of those quotes first. Alex, if you could go to the next slide, thank you. So I find about 9, that's 9 mistakes. This is not my word, this is the word chosen by our interviewed writers. I always foul it up. Yeah, so I picked them up, I've ticked it off. Pick them up is referring to errors and mistakes. These are the responses when asked about editing. I was doing bits and pieces of editing. There were small mistakes that hadn't been fixed. Having everyone edit their own writing isn't really the best way to do it because you overlook your own mistakes. The last 2 are quite distinct from those responses, and they come from the representative of an author-led publishing cooperative that Kim referred to earlier, Running Water Community Press based in Mparntwe, Alice Springs. So these are, as written, we've had collective participatory editing. We had a budget for 1 structural edit, 1 copy edit, and 1 proofread for a particular publication under discussion. So attitudinally, one can discern that our writers were seeing editing as an opportunity to correct mistakes, which can indicate perhaps it can be strengths-based. It can indicate that some of that peer critique that Kim spoke about was a preferred method, rather than it being a process that's called editing. There seemed to be a kind of conflation of editing with proofreading, and there was also a conflation of editing with giving something a read. So there was oft cited, I gave it to them and they gave it a read, which editing, of course, is reading, but it's reading for a particular purpose and application. So I'll keep moving through for now. Thank you, Alex, if you can do that. So majority knowledge of editing, majority of interviewees when asked about editing referred to mistakes. There was also an emphasis on covers, editorial input vis-a-vis covers, and some people referred to formatting, like the book design and the overall look and feel. One interviewee interestingly referred to Aussieisms, coining an Aussieism themselves, and wondering sometimes when they were reading other people's work, putting the question to themselves whether a writer was adopting or coining an Aussieism or whether it was just a misspelling. So I think that, that's exciting and dynamic. I mean, language evolves, and we applaud innovative use of language as well. So that reader slash peer reader slash peer editor asks that question of themselves, I think was really interesting. The interviewee representing that author-led community press spoke at length about the editing process as collective and participatory and central to the creation of books. That particular interview demonstrates a distinction between the majority of the works, I think, that our research exposed us to, in that the distinctly Indigenous representation issues were paramount and central to all of the decision making that the press did, to the extent that the board of the press were also authors themselves who were published by the press. So on the overall, self-published writers seem to consider editing as a corrective measure to do with presentation rather than a potentially generative one to do with writing expression or creativity. Now, that may just be a different understanding of a different use of words, like having a read of the whole work could be a synonym for an editing process. But the word editing itself was not one that was much foregrounded by writers and that we interviewed. As I said, the community press representative was particularly clear about the different types of editing, and indeed, from my deep dive into our transcripts, was the only interviewee who referred to all three types of editing: structural, copy, and proofing. And that interviewee, Olivia Nairo, clarified the processes involved in each and also named their employed editor. So the process of bringing something into the public domain was, fraught in a lot of ways, fraught with a lot of questions and challenges and complexities that this particular publisher and interviewee was very conscious of, and indicated that editing was part of that mediation process to publication. Alex, if you can go to the next slide. So just to dwell a little bit on that particular insight, or those sets of insights around the collective nature of that particular writing and publishing. The claim was made that all of the books that were published by the Running Water Community Press were collective. They had these collective participatory editing processes. They shared with us an example of how that's operationalized. The manuscript digital file is projected onto a television set up on a wall in a room large enough to hold a cohort of interested people, authors, the publishers, the designer, the editor, to literally track through the digital version of the manuscript that's visually seen in display, track through it together, reading it and saying whether they agreed with particular word choices or not, or whether things needed to be moved around. So a very dynamic, active process. They said also that decisions around graphic design were collective, and citing even though there was a single book designer working on the book, that designer would do mock-ups and integrate design feedback and direction from the collective stakeholders. This one can see pertains to the sensitivity around visual iconography choices that are made for a public audience. So the carefully calibrated design process was shared with us. They note too that with copy editing and proofing as a technical process, there was less collectivity required, that it was more structural editing, the order of things, the arrangement of things, the sequence of things. And they ended that particular insight with, of course, everybody was offered the opportunity to see the final files before they went to print. So, a very longer, throughout the entire process, a carefully calibrated dynamic process of communication through editing, design, and ultimately publication. So that's some detail on that. I might have reached my time, so I can hand over to Beth.
Alex.
Alex, thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Sandra. That's fantastic. So I'm going to talk about marketing. So once a book is written, it needs to find its audience. Our participants handled the marketing of their books in different ways and connected to communities both on and offline. So Jeff Close, who Kim mentioned as a regional dynamo in Winton, who is also the author of Winton and the Qantas Story, among other titles, published at his press, Spur and 8. He sees the opportunity for community connections that a published book and the marketing process can bring about. He sees this as an essential reason as to why he publishes books. When we spoke with Jeff, he said, and this is a bit convoluted, but you'll get to the point, I think. We've got a structure. So if you wrote a book there, Alex, you automatically get a $2 royalty. Soon as it's printed, I sign a check for $2 because I had so many people who get nothing out of writing a book, like nothing, or they get a bill. So they get $2, and then I add on $2 after costs, so I get $2. And then if they sell the book, they get the profit on it. And I say to people, we're aiming at people who like to go out to the markets, who live in communities, who will get an invite from the Probus Club, Lions Club, to come and be a guest speaker. So we can see here from this quote here that Jeff is actively encouraging his authors to sell at the local market or at the local agricultural show, to speak to the Lions Club, to connect with the community and sell the book. For Jeff, the connections that the book can foster are just as important as the book itself. Grace Elliott, who published her young adult novel, A Spot of Bother, with Jeff's imprint, she took this community-centered marketing challenge to heart and has seen some pretty impressive success. Before publishing her book, A Spot of Bother, Grace ran a tarot stall at the fortnightly Winton markets. Grace said that the stall doesn't contribute to her sales that much, but it was a great place to connect with other Winton residents. What did help her sales was her savvy use of social media. Grace made videos of her working dogs herding sheep and posted them on TikTok and Instagram as a way to promote her book. These videos resulted in the sale of 198 copies of her novel. So speaking about this strategy, Grace says, I was actually really impressed that so many people were interested in the book, and pretty much everyone who pre-ordered were people that I either knew in real life. They were either friends or family or people that I used to work with. So even though Grace is using digital technologies to market her book, it is still the people in her community that are the target audience. Grace has another unique marketing strategy. As the local postie, she is able to promote and deliver her book on her rounds. She says, she's no longer the postie, but she was it when we spoke to her. She said, I do a bit of business because I'm the postie. So if I run into someone, I'm just like, and by the way, did you know my book is out? I had a couple of people who were like, well, here's your $25. And when you come out on the mail run next week, you can drop it off. You can drop off the book, or you can bring a copy out next week and we'll leave money in the mailbox. Grace's parents are also amazing marketing reps for her book. She says, because my parents are agriculturalists, whenever they have people coming out, like the fellow who checks the wool or the cattle broker or anything like that, they come out and mum will just be like, oh, and did you know that our eldest has actually published a novel and da da da. And then I get a phone call from mum and she goes, oh, the wool man just came through and he had a friend with him and I've told him about your book. And anyway, they're going to be at the Roadhouse at 3:30. So if you could take 2 copies of your book to the Roadhouse, etc. Not only are Grace and her mother working overtime on the marketing of her novel, but this marketing strategy is deeply embedded in her community. Grace's novel, A Spot of Bother, is about a Dalmatian that has that a group of 6 siblings train to work sheep. And while Grace's actual working dogs, Havoc and Tempest, are not Dalmatians, the story of Bother the Dalmatian is drawn from her life as one of 6 children of agriculturalists. It's not just Grace's creativity that comes from place. Her community and the land that they live and work on is tied to the entire publishing cycle of her work. Mparntwe-based author Kathleen Ryder's books are also firmly rooted in place. When we spoke with Kathleen, she explained that she started writing the books that she wanted to read. She said to us, I couldn't find it anywhere. I mean, romance featuring flying doctors in the middle of nowhere. Novels like The Fling with the Flying Doctor are not simply set in Alice Springs. They're connected to the place in really intricate ways. This might appear inconsequential, but the ongoing issue of parking in and around Alice Springs Hospital is an important plot feature in Fling with the Flying Doctor, and it's also a widespread municipal annoyance for the residents of Mparntwe Alice Springs. And this was sort of something that we picked up on as readers, but also Kathleen was keen to kind of discuss with us and said more than once, like, the parking is terrible here. So the covers, as you'll see, of Kathleen's books are also deeply rooted in place. Covers of romance novels are a major part of their marketing collateral, and they contain clear signals around genre and subgenre that communicate with a dedicated and knowledgeable audience of readers. In commissioning the cover for Fling with the Flying Doctor, Ryder was very specific about what needed to be included. I was really specific, anal, one might say, about what I wanted. I specifically wanted it to have a doctor on the front in the scrubs with a background of Alice Springs. I'm so tired of people thinking that Uluru is in Alice Springs and slapping it on a book cover. It's like a whole another location. Romance authors have the reputation of being very sophisticated marketers, often setting the standard of digital marketing for the rest of the publishing industry. And Kathleen is no different. She connects with her community of readers online through her website, her newsletter, and social media. When we spoke with Kathleen about this, she told us about how connected this community was, saying, I don't make trillions of dollars yet, but I have a huge following on social media and my newsletter, and they will email me, they, the readers, frequently and tell me how much they loved this particular book or how much this one resonated with them because they never had a romance themselves and now they think they're too old because they're X years. While the community that Kathleen is writing for might be more diffuse than Grace's, it is so clear from talking with her that community is at the heart of her writing and her marketing. Her big online following is nurtured through her writing and through her marketing communications. And this is what makes her so successful and have the ability to continue to write. Grace and Kathleen have different readerships, so superficially their marketing strategies differ. However, what connects Grace and Kathleen is that they are savvy marketers, they know their readers, and they work hard to cultivate this readership in a caring, connected, and relational way. And Beth.
Thanks, Alex, and hi, everyone. Now it's time for an exciting foray into the world of distribution. Supply chains, databases, warehouses, trucks, packaging. The prosaic business of book distribution is arguably the least glamorous aspect of publishing. It's near invisible to readers, a hidden hinterland that precedes browsing at a bookstore or library, or a lacuna between the moment you order a book and it arrives on your Kindle or in your letterbox. Distribution is also the part of the publishing industry that's furthest away from the concerns of literary studies as a discipline. It's more about logistics than about texts. Books turn into units. Yet knowledge of distribution practices is absolutely crucial to book history and book culture studies. Alex? Yeah. Distribution, for example, is relevant to 3 of the 5 nodes in Robert Darnton's much-cited communication circuit: printers, shippers, and booksellers. Recent scholarly work on distribution, such as Matthew Kirschenbaum's article Bibliologistics and Anna Muenkraut's 2024 book Selling Books with Algorithms, demonstrate that distribution practices have developed markedly since the 19th century French context that Darnton was describing. The process of book distribution involves constraints, affordances, and relationships that are really significant in their own right. They offer us insights, for example, into the interplay between the digital and the material, as well as insights into the shifting labour relations that make up the book industry. Think of the controversies over Amazon warehouses. But distribution practices are also significant because they affect who can ultimately access and read a book, and therefore the social, cultural, and economic impact that that book has. In Australia in particular, distribution is and has been one of the greatest challenges for book culture due to our geographical vastness, the spread, and the distance we have from other Anglophone markets. In 1984, Michael Denholm wrote in Australian Book Review that, quote, "One of the biggest problems facing the book trade in Australia is the distribution of Australian books, both within Australia and overseas." Historical work by David Carter and Roger Osborne, hi Roger, has detailed the different ways this played out, including the distribution challenges for Australian authors in the American marketplace. More recently, author Anna Featherstone laid out the challenges for contemporary Australian authors in an article for Australian Writers' Centre. She points out that online distribution, that is distribution for ebooks and audiobooks, is relatively straightforward for those who have digital know-how. Physical distribution, however, still has significant hurdles. She writes, "It's very expensive in Australia due to distance, freight costs, storage fees, and the administration process. Some specialist distribution companies exist, charging authors 30% or more of a book's recommended retail price for their service, but there aren't many of these companies. They don't take on all books, and they don't guarantee placement in bookshops or libraries." Featherstone notes that, quote, "Another great way to distribute your book is to print it on demand via Ingram Spark, as bookstores in Australia and around the world will then be able to order it via their system if a customer requests it. The book will also show up in the bookstore's online shop. Similarly, you can print on demand with Amazon, so your book shows up as available to order on Amazon." That's the end of her quote. Notably, print-on-demand distribution methods, like ebook distribution, rely on the digital know-how of the author or publisher, as well as effective marketing, as Alex spoke about, so that customers can take the initiative in ordering. So given this industry context, one of the questions for our research project was, how are self-publishers and community groups in regional Australia approaching distribution? And of course, this is really important for understanding who gets to read these books and what impact do they have. Our first finding was that for most of the authors we interviewed, most of the ones spoken about in our presentation so far today, local distribution was what mattered. Partly this was because their creative activity was strongly place-based, with an intended primary readership of neighbours, family and friends, and a sales plan closely connected to local shops and institutions, like the Roadhouse Alex mentioned. We talked to Bronwyn Druce at the Red Kangaroo Bookshop in Alice Springs. This is a picture of their old store. They've since moved along Todd Mall a little further. This bookshop stocks a large number of Central Australian books, including self-published books, in a dedicated, prominent area of the store. The store also hosts numerous launches that bring people together. One author stocked at Red Kangaroo is our interviewee, John Spencer, who originally wrote his memoir, On Both Sides of the Fence, for friends and family. He's pleased to have it stocked at Red Kangaroo, but does not want wider reach. Some books are just written for a specific place. In addition to being linked to authors' motivations, the emphasis on local distribution sometimes arises from authors' production choices. For example, using a local print shop or even a print shop further away means that authors end up with boxes of books to distribute themselves. Using print on demand, however, would have allowed customers, libraries and booksellers to order the books themselves via online databases. Production choices are sometimes made on values, wanting to support the local print shop, but they sometimes also arise from a lack of knowledge about digitally enabled distribution. And I just wanted to give 2 examples of books that came up in our research that might have enjoyed wider distribution if they'd been more connected to digital infrastructure. Christine Adams, who Kim spoke about, told us she wanted everyone to read her series of local history books. She wanted everyone to know about Broken Hill. However, her books are mainly available locally in tourist offices and museums. Kim Vanessa Scott's Growing Up Catherine Style is a really beautiful book that I learned about online and listened to a radio program about it. Then I ordered it via email from Darwin Bookshop, but they had to wait for the author to visit and drop off some physical copies before they could mail one to me. Some of the authors we interviewed have been able to achieve distribution beyond their hometown, but only because of their hand-selling to people in relatively close networks. For example, Sonia Bradley-Scheuer, who Kim also mentioned, sells books from her RV as she travels around Queensland and beyond. Tony James from Broken Hill, who we interviewed, posted copies of his memoir about being a railway worker to other train enthusiasts that he was connected to on LinkedIn. A counterpoint to these experiences of limited distribution is the younger writers we interviewed, those that Alex spoke about in her section, who are digitally connected to international genre communities, and they do make some use of global distribution technologies. For example, Kathleen Ryder, she includes local elements in her books, exactly as Alex said, but like almost all romance authors, her primary readership is in America. So her ebook and print-on-demand distribution choices, in her case Amazon, support her sales into that American market. Digital technology is interwoven into the writing and publishing process for all of the people we interviewed, but it hasn't necessarily been a distribution game changer. This is partly because people's aims for their books are often local, personal, embedded in their community. But it may also be due to a lack of knowledge of what's possible and, on the flip side, a lack of easy go-to distribution options provided by the industry. Wide distribution requires some digital and industry savviness, and often an ebook version, which for many self-publishers is not the main game. Turns out they love print based on our interviews. As part of the outputs for this project, we've put together a DIY publishing toolkit, and in that we strongly emphasise the importance of digitally depositing books with state and national libraries. And we see this as a good way to start building digital distribution capability for self and community publishers, as well as being crucial to safeguarding the cultural heritage of these really important books. That's it for distribution. Back to you for the wrap up, Alex.
Thanks, Beth. I haven't written anything for the wrap up, but I will give a little wrap up, which is, I think through this entire publishing process, writing, editing, marketing, distribution, you can see from our case studies how community and place is integral to the work that is being done. And it was such an interesting and exciting finding for us to see the same themes come through all of our participants and to really learn about the role of place and community in this sort of, I suppose, creative practice. But I think it's probably best if we open up for questions and then we can probably expand on it a bit more. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now.
In the real sense, there'd be a huge round of applause going now. This is my moment, sort of. There you go. Look, you can see on the screen. That's the one of the innovations about Zoom that I've really liked is how these applause float through the screen. This is the moment for discussion and questions from everybody who's joined us this afternoon. I've certainly got a few, but I'll just invite anybody else. And at this moment, you turn on your camera, turn on your mic, and speak, or otherwise. We can also monitor the chat for any questions or comments that you might have. Pear's camera is on, so if you have a question or comment, Pear, you're the first on the line.
Sure, yeah, okay. I was trying to formulate it in my head, but I'll launch straight into it. Thank you all for that. That was really a really excellent and interesting presentation. I think the two parts of that most grabbed my attention, and has nothing to do with the quality of presentation, which was uniformly excellent, but rather the two parts that grabbed my attention were the marketing and distribution parts of that presentation. I feel like because they offered me some insights maybe that I hadn't sort of considered before, or some anecdotes that were particularly just delightful and new to me. And so it got me thinking about this project, and it got me thinking about what the appetite is for this kind of research project among the communities that most of us here for this session today would circulate in the academic communities that we circulate in, and wondering if potentially one of the challenges of this kind of research project is that some of the more interesting insights lie in the parts that are furthest afield from what our academic colleagues might be interested in. And then if I can add something to that, which is that then got me thinking about, or is one of the challenges of this kind of research the fact that the books themselves may not be of a quality or a type that some of our academic colleagues might be interested in. I don't know if you have that's a very loose question. I guess what I'm sort of looking for here is a kind of sense of how you feel this research is being received and where this is being situated inside the academy.
I have things to say, if I can.
Please.
Thanks so much for the question, Per. And I think you're right. There's a lot of interest from colleagues in literary studies. Like, you know, the one bit we didn't really talk about is what's in the books and are the books good and what's exciting about the books. And in some ways, I think this question, particularly of distribution, gets me because until we have that kind of secure, it's hard for people to read the books and for them to talk about what's in it. So, for example, the Tony James memoir about being 50 years a railway worker, I just really love that book. I love to read that book. I love his way of writing about his life. It's really almost modernist. Like it's just so engaging to me. And yet I don't know how many copies of that book are still left in the world. He just did the one print run. He posted them out to people. He hand sold a copy to me and Alex when we were in Broken Hill. So, for example, you couldn't set it on a course list for students to study. And I don't know if even academics could read it in an archive if they wanted to learn more about the text. And so I think until we've kind of started getting that deposit happening into libraries, it'll be hard for us to build the literary studies element alongside the publishing studies element. Anyway, that's just one reflection from me.
That's really interesting, Beth. That's really, really insightful. And hard to set it in a course, but hard to even write a book review of it, right? If then readers of the book review can't go and order it somewhere. Yeah.
And just on top of that, things like the kind of things that we would think of as literary value aren't necessarily important to the authors of these books. They have a different set of, they have a different idea of what's valuable literature. And I think that's a really, really important consideration before we start to think about these as, you know, literature and sort of bring them into the way that the academy usually sort of like works with literature. And that to me is almost the most fascinating part. It's almost something about how process is more important than outcome, that the actual writing of the story, the telling of the story, the authenticity of the voice to the community are always going to be are often going to be more important than the outcome in the way that we would normally judge it. I feel like I didn't describe that very well, but I just remember when I was at the Outback Writers Festival, somebody asking, I think, a question about editing, Sandra, and the woman who was standing up, she'd self-published a local history, saying, oh, well, that doesn't matter as much as getting the story down. And I feel like that is such an emblematic quote about the motivations that people have. But that's not to say that's across the board, because there is also what we think of as traditional literary value in these, in some of these as well.
I would add to that, and it is a good question, and I think we've got a great team because we really like listening to each other and hearing the dimensions that we continue to bring forward. So great question, tapping that, and really, really lovely listening to Beth and Kim on those responses. I think methodologically too, Read Literary Studies and Publishing Studies were innovating. So the European Journal of Cultural Studies surprisingly in that it's European and we're talking about place in regional Australia, they were very interested in the research and the work, and most of the questions, peer review questions for revision, were around the Indigenous epistemology and methodology of relationality and place. So there is that as an innovation in research land, academia. Also, I think in troubled times, lots of the old ways of doing things are being usurped. I like analogous thinking, so this kind of stretches us a little bit, but there was an article this morning in the media around McDonald's partnering with about 10 Australian universities to have the micro-credential training conducted within McDonald's with their workforce, recognised by these about 10 Australian universities. Once completed by the employees/students, that can equal 1 year of a Masters of Business Administration in those respective universities, and cost them, make a savings of about $20,000. So in our troubled times where everything is changing, I think understanding more of what happens out of dominant centres will become even more important. And I'm speaking here to, people associated with James Cook University. No doubt that's been a mantra of JCU for decades and since inception. So there's that, we want to innovate. We don't want just great books and established normative pedagogies and ways of understanding things. So I see this research as a contribution to that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Sandra, and Kim as well.
There are some questions in the chat. Luci, do you want to ask your question, or will I read it out?
I can read it out. I just wanted to write it down, so I just didn't end up with a word salad. So firstly, hi, thank you so much for giving this talk. I found it really, really interesting. I'm a very new PhD student, so I'm in my 3rd week through UNE. I've got a few questions about your project. So the first one is, with the participants you interviewed, was there a driver discussion within them, like between them, to enter traditional publishing? And I suspect you kind of half answered that already in the discussion so far. And within, I guess, the different themes that came up in these self-published authors, is there opportunity to kind of, I guess, have a bank of sorts of, like, exploring those themes, like, say for research? And also, would I be able to link in with any or all of you at a later date when my own research is a bit clearer, like, when I'm closer to kind of my confirmation of candidature, that kind of thing? Because I think this project certainly is, at least in the periphery of one of the questions of my own kind of project. So yeah, thank you so much.
I'm happy to answer this question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, Kim, your interview with Liz Spencer, you might recall there was mention of attempting to be published through legacy publishing means. And in some cases, when people didn't achieve a publishing outcome by that method, they explored what the alternatives would be. So I think those, recognising the agency of writers in regional places was really important. Their strengths that they bring to it, the different aesthetics that they may well be developing by not having editors, by not budgeting, you budget for things you value. So if editors, professional editors aren't being valued, they're not being budgeted for, they're not influencing the shape of the work, and the work may well be developing its entirely different literary aesthetic as well as visual aesthetics. We as a team have discussed that, like the visuality of some of these works that, wouldn't compare or compete on an inner city metropolitan bookstore, but was recognisable to the readers in regional areas. So that was just a question, response on the traditional or legacy publishing pathways.
If I could just build on that, Sandra.
Email as well.
Sorry.
I'm happy to be contacted after. Thank you.
Sorry, Sandra. I will just continue to speak over you. Just to build on that from Sandra, it's such a great point. I think one of the things, and this does also build on the response to Pear's question / provocation around value. This is something that I've thought, or we've all thought a lot about. And there are some participants like John and Liz Spencer who talked about going down a particular pathway and then it not really working out and then going into self-publishing. But there are also a huge number of participants we have who haven't even really considered it and don't really have a huge amount of oversight into the process of what Sandra says is like legacy publishing. And I think that one of the reasons for that is what you said, Sandra, is about what the values are. And I think that getting the book into the world is what is valuable. And what is a book, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, but from brain to paper to hand, like I think that is actually what is being valued and what is the way to get that done without intervention, without, I don't know, strife. And it does lead people in our data set to they're open to exploitation from vanity publishers and that kind of stuff. Like it does open like these other kind of can of worms. But there's a sort of beautiful ignorance of the industry and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, for a lot of our participants. And what they want is to get their book into the world, get their ideas into the world, their memories, their experiences. And it's so raw like that. It's like I am communicating this idea, and I think that's nice.
And maybe I can chime in. I really want to hear all about your project, by the way, Lucy, and definitely get in contact after.
Oh, please. Yeah.
But just, I think Sandra and Alex were pointing out the diversity in our data set. So, what Alex was saying is absolutely true for some people, but in my mind, I was just thinking about a couple of the people we interviewed who are so savvy that they could do a better job than many small presses of the, like I'm thinking of Rose, who writes the dinosaur books, Rose Seaver. So she was published through Bullerong Press, which has Queensland-based distribution, but she wanted wider distribution than that. And she had knowledge of publishing herself. And so to her, it made more sense to self-publish than to go with an established press. And that would be the same for Kathleen Ryder too. I think she says at one point, why would I give some of my royalties to a publisher when I know how to do it? So a real mixture of attitudes to the publishing industry, I think. Yeah, a big variety.
I'm just waiting on the moment to invite Amy, who has a question for you all as well. So yours, Amy.
Thank you everyone for today. I also have found it really, really interesting. And as you've kept talking, I'd get a question and then you would answer it. So then I'd get another question. So I guess what I'm interested to know is, as someone who's also based in a regional centre, and writers are constantly asking me about getting their work published and trying to explain to them this dichotomy of, as you say, this kind of regional type autobiography, very place-based, very local-based, type publishing versus commercial distributed in gimmicks in the big cities, and the massive gap in between, trying to explain to them where this is going. And one thing I have really noticed, I'm curious to know if this is what you guys noticed, is that there tends to be very specific demographics I have found who are interested in the self-publishing. So I have found that particularly people over the age of about 40, 50, and particularly retirees seem to be very, very interested in this idea of capturing memoir, capturing local history, capturing stories of place to represent the community. And then the second part of it is, as a children's author, I get approached by a lot of women who have just become first-time parents who all want to publish a children's book. So it feels like there's these two life stages that I see that are really, really strongly correlated to this type of regional place-based publishing. So I'm curious to see if that's something that you also saw reflected in your research.
Can I have first go? You've picked up on something really interesting, Amy, and something we're writing a current paper about is the sort of the rhythms that, because we've written a lot about place, but we kept finding these things about time as well, and how in regional communities and beyond, obviously, as well, certain seasons of things would happen. And that could be literal seasons. Like we spoke to a community group who said they couldn't get their anthology underway until after the crushing was done, which is a sugarcane season, but also times of life. We definitely saw people who would say, now I've retired, I can write that memoir, I can write my life story. Or yes, when I had children, then that started me on my publishing journey in a different way. Yeah. So Beth, were you going to answer too?
Yes, very similar. But Amy, one of our interviews was a grandparent who was writing picture books for her grandchildren, and she wrote a different book for each grandchild as it was born. So that's kind of the two worlds colliding. But yeah, I do think that idea of like when is the time that people want to write or have the capacity to write in a lifetime is really important to this kind of work, and also that drive to get a story down and share it with others. I think that's a really powerful motivator.
I'd add to that, which is really fascinating, I think, and great question and comments, Amy. It's a reflection perhaps on writing not as a professionalized activity, but writing and being published as an embodied, placed and grounded activity relevant to who you are, where you are, and what you're doing. So there's a way to interpret that, which I think unsettles what we think of as literature.
Yes. Thank you.
Sorry, just maybe to chime in with the little counterpoint to that, which I completely agree with. I am thinking of some of the younger people we interviewed who were keen to have at least an income stream as a writer and maybe build some professional networks through their online writing communities, and that was kind of connected to their life circumstances too, and that desire to build a creative career, at least as part of what they were doing. It's pretty interesting.
I see Rafaela's hand is up, ready to go.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I have so many questions, but I'll limit it. My PhD research is also looking at the relationship between authors and editors. So the part where Sandra was talking particularly about the collective participatory editing, I found very interesting. And I wanted to ask, was there an editor or just the publisher? Was the publisher also someone who had trained as an editor sitting around that? Or was that also a response to perhaps a lack of editors being available in these regional places for that connection, that face-to-face connection? And whether that was sort of also a symptom of that idea that, you know, of these circles of publishing professionals that are centered around sort of the urban centers rather than spaced out regionally. So just more info on that, please.
Yeah, Rafaela. One of the people that we met and formed a closer relationship with is Marie Ellis, who at that time self-described as a publisher. who's a woman, an Aranda woman, and a creative herself. So people, as you probably appreciate, in areas that are not highly urbanized, tend to wear several different hats at the one time. And certainly the authors, including poets and prose writers, consider themselves publishing experts in their own works. So once again, it wasn't someone out there was going to bring the work forward into the public domain, it was them. And the collectivization was necessary because people are really clear about what should go out and in what shape it should go out. So that's in part an answer, I think. Trust is another important element of that. So the editor that does get named in the data is someone that particular author-led cooperative publisher felt confident they could empathetically, sensitively read and approach the questions of mediation of text for a broader reading public. So irrespective of where they were located. So it was about prior relationship and the nature of the relationship.
Thank you.
Can I add one other thing? In fact, when we were in Mparntwe, Alice Springs, the team, you might recall, someone challenged us a little bit in referring to regional Australia because they didn't feel comfortable actually being referred to as a writer from regional Australia. So I was in email communication with someone today who said we're in Central Australia, and I stopped myself from writing about how far away they are and refer to them being in the centre of everything. So our need to reprogram ourselves around, I'm ashamed to admit that in my PhD I wrote about the tyranny of distance. No, there's no tyranny in it. It was actually quite good. So yeah, the work contributes to unsettling those, the dominant centre versus everything else, and the strengths that you can find in places that aren't highly urbanised.
Thank you for pointing that out too, because I realised how much I had been also perpetuating that in my own thinking, and being an editor based in Cairns as well, just realising how limiting I'd been referring to myself as a regional editor. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Raphael. I had a call just before our gathering this afternoon, and it was about the septic tank at the house that I own on country in rural southern Queensland. And, listening to my colleagues talk about some of these works, where the life permeates the storytelling in a way that's authentic, the word that Beth used before. There's possible future interest in how that authenticity could be mimicked by others who don't experience it, or by other agents that aren't even human. So that's not something we've touched on in this work, but that could be in future work.
I think it's my turn now. I've been waiting. I've got a. This has been really good. It's been really good to listen to you all speak. I've got a few questions, and one of them is about anthologies. In the all of the places that you went to, and I say that because I've just recently written a preface for the Tropical Writers Inc. anthology that is being launched in November. So the local writers here in Cairns, they've been publishing anthologies for 20 years. It's the 20th anniversary of their publishing. So it's an important part of the creative ecology up here. So did anthologies come up often in the discussions you had with? I see all of the heads nodding. So just could you say some more about that, please?
Can I go first? Because I've got this lovely story from, I went to the Outback Writers Festival in Winton earlier this year. That's how you know that you've had successful fieldwork, when they invite you back. So, Jeff Close, who we mentioned earlier, who puts these books together, he's a big fan of anthologies. He does anthologies of short stories for the short story competition that runs every year. But this was the 150-year anniversary of Winton as a town. And he'd got all of these short works of things that people remembered about the town, and put them into a book which is about that thick. And some of them were what he calls folk history, because they were told by a parent to somebody who's finally written it down or whatever. And he read this beautiful little part of a story about when the cinema in the main street burned down, which was something like 1938, but had been told by a parent to someone who subsequently wrote it down, and Jeff read it out at the book launch. And he got quite emotional, and I got quite emotional too. Once he read it out, he said, he closed the book and he tapped the cover and he said, and now we have that forever. That idea of the book as being something that can really sort of like remember things forever, or, you know, sort of in perpetuity is so important. But yes, there were other types of anthologies too. Maybe one of my colleagues would like to talk about.
Yeah, I think anthologies are really important, and they really link into Kim's part of the talk in terms of how a community can shape a piece of writing, and also the role of the regional dynamo that Kim talked about. So the Winton Outback Anthology, just knowing that there was a regular submission date, actually it's for the short story prize, and then the shortlists are published in the anthology. That kind of created a structure that creative practitioners could organise their writing around, and even if it wasn't published in that, it was often a good prompt for people to start writing. So I think anthologies have that sort of purpose. But then there was another really interesting one where we interviewed two members from the same writing group that had produced an anthology, and they both reflected on the process. And it seems like it was a real crucible for different visions about what the book might be, and questions like, does it need an ISBN or not? You know, no if it's just going to our friends and family, yes if we want it in the library. Do we want it bound, or will spiral binding, you know, do we want it paperback? So it really kind of flushed out the different approaches to writing within the group, and kind of modelled that collective decision making that Sandra mentioned with editing in terms of production. So I think anthologies are, you know, they provide a really powerful insight into how books are part of communities.
I might get to go again. That does remind. I was thinking of. I was waiting for the discussion about printers and publishers, and because I was thinking of that book design that you mentioned, the need to be on the cover, and you used the word commission. The cover was commissioned, and I wondered whether locally, whether like that part of the creative ecology of bookmaking, whether there is much of like the cover designer is in town, or does that come from elsewhere? Or
that's a great question. I think with that example, and maybe I should have been a bit clearer with Kathleen Ryder, the professionalism that she has developed in her practice is remarkable, and she's part of a network of romance authors and cover designers who trade and commission, and there's a sort of ecology, a kind of commercial ecology on Instagram and Facebook for covers. For other books, design has like varying levels of importance, and you can sort of see that a little bit when you look at the different books. And you know, Tony James's book is a really good example. It just has it's a maroon cover with a photo on it. It has the sort of very long title, and then it just says at the bottom, notes from a diary. His name's not even on the front, so that, and then it's got a photograph from his own archive. But other people who we've spoken to have had really, really clear ideas about small design choices. Sandra, do you want to talk about Sonia's design choices around her book cover and the interior layout? I think that you spoke with her, so it's probably best that you speak to that.
Yeah, and I wonder, it's a good question. I wonder if there was less importance placed on the decisions around covers. I think, you know, covers are usually quite highly emotive topics for people, because they are actually they've had it in their mind for a while what the book's going to look like, and I think that might have been borne out in at least some of the interviews. So Sonia Bradley Shoyer's work, my book of poetry, but it's poetry narrative more. Come walk with me, come, and then an ellipses, and then walk with me, all initial letter capitalization, with the dinkus of 2 feet and the 5 toes, including the thumb, and then her name beautifully placed below one of her own photographs that features 2 of her grandchildren on a hilltop in a beautiful central Queensland sunset. And what I found really interesting with that cover is it kind of reflected Sonia's approach to her own family history, her view of what's political, what's not political, should she foreground her Aboriginality or not, when in fact the photograph that she deliberately took kind of has echoes of the silhouette of an Aboriginal person standing on a hilltop on 1 foot with one leg bent at the knee. I don't think that was a conscious thing, which kind of goes to that ambivalence of Sonia's around how much she foregrounds her Aboriginality. So I think it's really interesting how people's maybe creative tensions, ideological tensions actually do get expressed in the visual. It's certainly there on that cover. The use of the 2-foot dinkus also feels very Aboriginal, but it's not. And it's on every, first page of each chapter from memory, or maybe even sections. So, it's very present throughout the work. I think it's a beautifully designed book, and Sonia used an online offered publishing professional to create that work, and was very present in all of the decisions made around it. And that small family-run business is based in Brisbane. So in that case, to go to your question, Roger, the geography didn't drive the decision. A range of other factors drove Sonia's decision to work with them and to pay them for particular production support elements of the work. Yeah, and I think trust was the comment I made before about running Water Community Press. That particular editor they used on a particular publication wasn't based in Central Australia, but it was someone that different people of the collective had prior positive experience with. So where they were geographically based was less relevant than the trust in the relationship.
It seems like the connection is really important, and then that sort of goes beyond those localities. Are there any more questions from anybody, or comments? We are really coming up to the end of time, which shows how rich this conversation has been. I might, if it's going once, going twice, going 3 times, I might just end and thank you all with just showing so this goes to Pear's, one of the questions that we were having what happens when you find yourself in a regional location is people tend to give you books. And I've noted this was given to me. It's a self-published book. It's about cans. And so for me, the Auslit nerd, I looked to see if it was on Auslit, and it's not. The author is already there, but there is that. I think the work that you're doing is filling in gaps that it does generate work for all of us, though, as well, right? That there's only so much that you can do, and the idea of regional or location is such a big and complex thing. It's given me a lot to think about, and also the work that needs to be done to fill in those gaps, sort of get this on Auslit, and not only that, but all of the other work that's being done out there that's kind of invisible, but it could be made more visible. You've done a big job of doing that and continuing with this project. So I thank all four of you for agreeing to be the last of the year for us. And it has been like a really good way to end the year. It's such a really rich conversation, and one that's really important for all of us who live and work in regional areas. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing more about the project as you continue to speak and publish.
Thank you
Thanks
so much.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, lovely conversation. And Elizabeth, thank you for that reference. I'm going to go and read it.
Yeah, thanks for everyone making the time to join in. It's it's hard to do at this time of year, but I'm very glad that we've all done that. And thanks for the invitation, Roger.
Yeah, not a problem. It's really, really good to see you all.